¿Grabo? Ya, cuando grabas.
So, congratulations for your new book. How do you feel about your book having been translated into Spanish?
It feels wonderful. I mean, this is my first book in Spanish, and it's my most recent book in English, and so it feels like it's a very timely thing. I mean, your books don't come out in translation in the order in which you write them, and this feels like a particularly appropriate book to begin with, and also it's I hope it to some small degree pays a debt that I feel I owe to Spanish literature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I've read and benefited from my entire life.
I appreciate books as if it were painting or something I approach opening my senses, and it is from this perspective that I'm going to ask you. Why realism? Do you think that the postmodern approach is already over? People are, I mean, this attitude of the reader playing as if it were a game is, what do you feel? Why have you chosen realism in this book?
Oh, is it realism? I don't know. Is it realism? Is it naturalism? You know, does it show the way the world is, or does it through characters experiencing it, or is it more naturalistic in the sense of it shows the processes that shape certain characters? I don't know. I mean, I write from a position of thinking that we're over everything, and that everything is over, and that everything is behind me, and it gives me, mostly because that delusion gives me freedom.
You have devised a very powerful narrator. Actually, when I was reading it, it is like a king of kings.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, can you speak of your narrator?
Well, my protagonist, yeah. I mean, it's you know, it's third person, but so my protagonist, David King. I mean, sure, the name should make obvious the references. I mean, not only is he a version of King David, who was sort of the bloodiest, let's say, of the Israelite kings, but it also is a reflection or a nod to the characters in the story being drawn from biblical figures, Uri and Yoav, you know, being soldiers of David. I wanted to, first of all, it's a typical name, David King. It's kind of there's also a sort of a sound in my ear of the very old kind of 1910s and early 1920s radio commercials of, you know, the mattress king, you know, or, you know, the toothpick king, you know, meaning the person who, the number one manufacturer of a certain thing. It is a certain kind of mercantile or commercial ring to it. But I wanted to make a man who was king, but king of his very small nation. And whether that nation is his family, which is falling apart, or his moving business, which is expanding into areas which are uncomfortable, such as eviction moving. I wanted him to be king of a kingdom that is not just small, but fracturing. And it's only when he leaves that kingdom, however it's defined, does he realize how minor it is and how imperiled it is. And yet when he's within the context of that kingdom, or the bubble of that kingdom, he feels omnipotent.
Even when he's not, because when he's in front of that American, very important man, he's all the time trying to keep up with the very important people, trying to be introduced.
Right. Well, that's when he leaves his he leaves his kingdom, in a sense. He takes one step out and he's immediately intimidated. So he's a person who then remains very parochial. He remains very provincial and closed off in order to maintain that delusion of power, which is, of course, what a novelist does as well.
Okay. Actually, what I was referring to before is the narrative voice in the text. I find it so strong. You do what you want, actually. I mean, you're allowed to, obviously, but it seems to me that you're going to speak about Uri and then you turn to Job, or just the opposite, and then you summarize what the characters would say, 2 lines, and you jump into something else. So
right.
somehow the reader feels that the people under command is the narrative voice all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a book. I have 2 thoughts with this. One is I had a very, again, a mercantile thought or a business thought, spending time with people who are in business and their impatience. Their yes, get to the point, and their impatience and the degree to which they almost don't listen to you. They just want what they want when they want it, where they want it, and they need it now, right? And I wanted to have that same freedom. I said, why should these business people be having all the fun? But the second thing really was I had this idea of my own empire, of my own kingdom, let's say, or my own army. And where in the beginning of a book I can be the general and deploy the soldiers and send them out into the book. But then at a certain point, they rebel and there's an insurrection and they begin telling me what to do. And I think that's a model for most writers. Yeah.
Okay, most of your characters sweat. They sweat because of the effort to become perfect, to become more than what they are. Is this a process which I find present as part of the Western tradition? Do we really have to be like this, or is it just a mirror of what we are, and this should be like a warning not to? I mean, I don't think people can be happy always pretending to be what they are not, trying to reach a certain point that they cannot reach, with perfection ahead. And if you think of the American Constitution and the pursuit of happiness, I don't think happiness can be pursued this way.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write a book about kids, or boys on the edge of becoming men, who are leaving their family, their army, their state, in which they've always sort of been under command and told what to do. And now this is their first time coming to America, where they begin to be able to make decisions for themselves. And they find it more difficult. They actually find it more effort, more sweat involved. And the question is, what are the benefits?
Yes, actually, one of the ideas is obedience. Obedience, and another idea which I find interesting is the process under which I think it is Zurich follows: illusion, frustration, violence. Somehow, with these 3 points, you are forecasting. You are already saying what is going to happen later on. Is this how it goes?
I don't know. I mean, I think that one of the most difficult discussions to have, for example, in Israel, is a discussion of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Which I don't know the Spanish word for it, but you're serving, and after your service in the army, you're traumatized by it. And so in a country where there's compulsory military service, if you admit that it exists, then you're saying almost your whole country has PTSD. I think that these are both characters who are under strain, and they find it more difficult to be free, or to be ostensibly free, than it would to be emplaced within some sort of hierarchy. Be it, again, a state hierarchy, and a military hierarchy, a familial hierarchy. And I think they're grappling with the ideas of freedom, and with the disillusion of freedom as well. And violence, for them, or at least for Uri, is a way to give up that struggle. His violence is a way to sort of surrender and retreat from the struggle of dealing with his freedom.
Were you a witness of the conflict yourself?
Oh, which conflict?
I mean, at Gaza line.
Oh, I mean, I wasn't there during the Gaza war, but I've been to Gaza, and I've been to, certainly spent much more time in the West Bank, Palestine, and have family members who've been, involved in numerous Israeli conflicts. I was present, though, after the housing crisis in the States, and did see a number of evictions, and it was really the rhyme between the two. Just the fact that the sensory data, let's say, of both, they seem to share some ideas. I think people have a very hard time these days dealing with metaphor. Metaphor is something is like something, it's something as something, right? It's a transposition of one quality to another. And an analogy is much more like a mathematical equation, A equals B. And I wasn't making an analogy with this book, but a metaphor, that there are these same emotions invested in lives that are victims to power in American cities, and lives that are victims to power in the territories that Israel occupied. And I wanted to show that what we perceive as injustice that happens far away is an extreme version of what happens at home. And that at home being, for me, United States, there are all of these legal fictions, these legal masks that allow us to perform immoral actions every day, and yet rely on their legalism, their legality. And I wanted to have Yoav understand that. And I wanted to show him grappling with that, which is sort of the beginning of his political awareness.
Are you indebted to your race?
Am I indebted?
Do you feel indebted?
Well, I don't know how one does that.
Do you think you ought to do something about it, about the Israeli conflict and American youth?
I mean, as a human, yeah. Oh.
Because I like the introductory song where you say something like, I haven't got this for this.
If I didn't speak up, my bones were old through roaring all the day.
Thank you.
No problem.
Somehow I see the author. Actually, it's the only time when I see the author.
I mean, the author of that is King David. It's one of David's psalms of apology.
No, the author,
Right.
I mean the writer.
Right, no, I know, yeah. I mean, I tend never to say where I am present, but I mean, I think that to see any injustice, and not in some way express the outrage that you feel, just even in a selfish way, is corroding of your own soul.
So you had to do it.
Had to do
You
it.
needed to do it. You needed to do it.
It felt, it felt necessary, yeah.
Another thing, I don't know if it is my perspective, but teaching American literature, teaching Moby Dick, teaching the frontier in the West, I see a physical frontier and the risk at being at a physical frontier. And somehow I establish a comparison with what happened in America at the time of the conquest. And I see that how were you going to call what Uri and Joab do when they occupation. Is this the same occupation that happened in America with the conquest?
I didn't have that in mind when I was writing it. No, I actually had much more in mind what you said. That's why I was smiling earlier with Melville, right? I mean, what is that? It's a boat full of men of different nationalities, races, ethnicities, languages, who are forced by circumstance onto this boat where there is no police force or fire department, or, I mean, there's a chain of command, but they're on a piece of wood that relies on the wind in the middle of the ocean, faced with the ferocity of nature, endangered by the ferocity of nature. And I've always, the sea, I grew up Atlantic City on the water, the sea is always, I could never get too far from the sea. And instead of a ship, because I don't come from the era of ships, or at least those kinds of ships, I thought of a moving truck, that I would have a moving truck with that crew. And now I know that obviously a lot of the critical work around Melville and certainly around Moby Dick is using it as a metaphor for the American West and the conquest, the conquest of the West. And I mean, but that's the trick of Moby Dick. It's the whale is a symbol for everything, and it's the horror of its mutability. It's the horror of its protean capacity as a symbol to absorb any meaning that, to me, makes it a fundamentally American book, right? It will absorb any meaning. The whiteness of the whale will absorb any meaning given to it.
Yes, but somehow, when I think of Moby Dick in this sense, it's because I think Ismail gets saved because of Queequeg, because of the race, because of a different race. And here in your book you have a tomahawk, you have the cavalry coming to
Absolutely.
rescue, you have the good ones, and you think about what being good is, and you think about the whiteness as a phantom, not necessarily white being pure and perfect. And this somehow makes me think of Moby Dick and the whiteness of the whale. I mean, all these speculations about the color white and evil, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, for me, it's about the accidental nature of the intimacy. People shoved together into a boat and people shoved together into a truck. People kind of going into people's homes and being in these intimate relations with one another. Basically, we're strangers, and yet forced into intimacy, which is like also the condition of the city. But for me, it was again the element of Moby Dick that's the least interesting to me is who saves Ishmael. I mean, let's be aware that it's a book where everyone dies in it except one guy. So, whereas in this, at least some of the cast still survives.
Okay, then why do you think Joab survives and becomes, why Joab survives?
And only I have lived to tell the tale.
Because I have the feeling that it is because of the races, because there is a sacrifice involved, because something happens in a kind of Jeremiah writing that he is, in the end, he saves himself. Something happens to him, some violence and sacrifice, and this has to do with different races and different religions, etc.
I mean, I think in my mind, Joab survives because in the Bible, Joab survives and Uri is the sacrifice. But, for me, it was less a question of who saves whom or what race is involved with whose salvation. And it was more an attempt to portray the chaos of the situation, the immediacy of it.
yes, I mean,
And almost the accidental nature of all of it. I mean, you know, a thing about a book is that no matter how chaotic you try and make it, it's still words in order. And it will never impart to you the true feeling, the true dizziness of chaos, of a burning building, which is the, you know, the end of the book, basically. And I wanted to take all of these rhetorics and these modes of speech and crash them up against each other, and see what happens. Yeah.
actually, it was appalled to see the city, like a plastic bag, the possessions, all classified in plastic bags. And then somehow the whole city seems plastic. And these cubicles where people
Store their things,
live,
yeah. Yeah, also, okay.
and these possessions, and you feel free when you are somehow dispossessed of your belongings, of your memories. This is what interests me in this respect. And another thing I was thinking of is as the narrator goes, no description of a tree, no nature around until the very end, which is like a magical realism, and there you find trees, in a kind of magical environment. But all the time I was thinking, there's no tree, no nature, no description of anything. I suppose obviously you have.
Yeah, it was the city in the desert, the city in the desert, the city in the desert, yeah.
Even New York City.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the nature of the book is really an abandonment of nature. You know, nature is present by its absence, and then when nature comes into the story, I wanted it to be extraordinarily violent. So that's with the blizzard, the snowstorm. The idea that, you know, that nature is this threatening force, and that it makes all religious or racial strife and anger pointless, because we're all there under the storm.
So somehow you say we have to protect ourselves from the winter, or and snow winter time is supposed to be the real menace of
Yeah, yeah. And I wanted to have that sense of the almost theological, right? This book has a lot of religion in it, but it has no theological or divine force, and that for me was nature. Yeah, that for me, the hand of God, let's say, is the blizzard, and that crushes the petty human differences. Yeah.
Well, is there anything you would like to add?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like we've spoken about the book in depth, and I hope people read it. You know?
Hope
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, to my mind, it's though I can't speak Spanish, I can pick out little things here and there, and it's a wonderful translation. And I think that you know, that I've translated before, and I think, you know, to speak about a book in another language without speaking about the translator is immoral in a way. And truthfully, I'm very lucky to have the translator that I have, and there seems to be a sensitivity in the rendering that I'm grateful for.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Muy bien, podemos